Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio no pictures live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast as you're driving along in your car or your truck or on public transport. In this essay, I'd like to draw and observe the parallels, the similarities between the recent government response to the anti-immigration protests in Britain and the January 6th protests in the United States, in Washington, D.C. Now, I'll just give a little bit of background, or actually, before I do that, the response by the authorities in both cases was astonishingly severe, incredibly swift, or no resource was spared. They just threw resources at it, and they went after people who'd simply been in the proximity. Maybe they'd been standing in Washington, D.C. taking photographs of, they went after people who had nothing to do with any protest or weren't violent or damaged anything. There was nothing there to go chasing after. But the response was incredibly brutal and severe by the authorities. But what was, I guess, more interesting still, or as interesting, was the way they discarded due legal process. People were arrested arbitrarily without charge on the flimsiest misdemeanor charges, which wouldn't warrant prison under any circumstances. And then they would put them in prison without regard to habeas corpus. Activist judges could be found at a moment's notice to throw these people in prison for really no evidence at all. There was an insane level of threat and intimidation and bullying of some very simple people from out in the sticks, and we'll get you 100 years in prison and you'll be this, you'll be that. But if you sign this, and so there was a lot of intimidation of people, and this is all illegal, but yet judges, FBI agents, lawyer operatives of all sorts, even the lawyers supposedly representing the people, they all went along with this, and there was hardly any pushback. The media supported it because we'll get those Nazis and so on. But what was the background to the January 6th thing? I mean, just really, really quickly, there was Donald Trump, on the night of the election was on target for quite an easy victory, but somehow during the small hours of the morning and when the polling booths opened again the next day, somehow millions upon millions of votes were suddenly found for Joe Biden, and it was all very suspicious. And there were some concerns that the independent onlookers were saying, hey, there's over 20 million votes that are in question here. Either the chain of custody was broken, that is, the votes were taken from voting booth to a sub-holding area, then onto the collation centre, and every time the votes moved, the boxes are sealed, with the votes in the cartons are sealed, and they move to the next end. Somebody signs saying, I'm letting 10,000 votes with 20 cartons, sealed cartons, and someone would sign as receiving that. Then they would take it to the next area, wherever that may be, the holding area, the district holding area, or the collation area, the counting place, whatever it might be. Then there's someone signs, I'm handing it over to you, and someone signs they're receiving it. So it's all very tight, very clear where the votes are, and so on. And this is a very important part of keeping the election integrity process in order. But there was many millions of votes that where there was a broken chain of custody, and where nobody knew from one place to the next how many votes had been picked up and how many were being delivered. Now, the independent onlookers quite reasonably said, oh, that's a problem there. Now, the bigger problem, or as big a problem with that, those broken chain of custody votes, they were overwhelmingly for Joe Biden, which makes it doubly suspicious. You've got a broken chain of custody, and suddenly they're overwhelming just for one candidate and not the other. I mean, again, you don't need to be partisan to look at that and say, hey, that's a real problem. And there was similarly problems with signature matching, given the amount of mail-in ballots that were there. The signatures, again, close to 10 million votes, the signatures weren't matched. and that could be proven. There was a lot of question marks. Millions of those votes were in paper that had never been folded. Now, if you post the vote out to somebody, and then it's folded into two parts in the paper, and then they mail it back into in the same envelope with a signature on the outside. And so, but millions of these votes, a large number of them were in paper that hadn't been folded. So that's very suspicious there. Again, those ones that were suspicious were overwhelmingly for Joe Biden. Similarly, the votes that weren't signature matched, where they could prove that they weren't signature matched, they again were overwhelmingly for Joe Biden. So there was between 20 and 22 million votes that were disputed, but no court would hear the matter. They go, no, you guys have to solve this politically. We don't want to hear it. Now, I've noticed the courts will get involved if it's, say, two Democrats who are disputing the outcome of an election. Then the courts will involve. But where it's the different parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, the courts don't want to get involved in that. And that's a repeating pattern there. Nonetheless, those votes were disputed. Now, we've also, dealing with a cant Joe Biden who, even back then, could barely string a sentence together. He was already in severe mental decline at that point. Could barely string a sentence together. He never campaigned. Not like, say, Obama, who was exhaustively campaigning across the length and breadth of the United States, and was quite a decent speaker, by the way. I mean, he might have been a useless president, but he was quite a decent speaker, and he got decent turnouts at his public speaking events and so on. Now, so Obama, you would think, well, that guy could do pretty well in an election because he really did work hard at getting out there and having those public meetings and public rallies, things like that. But Joe Biden didn't. So you've got a guy in severe mental decline who isn't popular to begin with, and who does no zip, zero, nada, zilch campaigning, and yet Joe Biden, we're told, got the most votes of any presidential candidate in the history of presidential elections. Just let that sink in. The most votes, by far, the most votes of any presidential candidate in the history of presidential elections, Joe Biden. So the record holder up until that time had been Obama with 69 million votes in the presidential election, but Biden got 12.5 million more votes than Obama did, and he didn't campaign, and again, he could barely put a sentence together. So a lot of people looked at that, independent observers looked at that and said, well, hey, that's not possible. You don't get the all-time record of vote holders when you're not even out campaigning, when you're not even out sort of on the hustings, doing the hard yards and doing the public rallies, because Biden couldn't do that. And again, even at the time, he was incapable of that. And then all these disputed votes where you've got the broken chain of custody and the signature matching not done. And now there are various other things. You could add probably a couple of million votes to that, and things like illegal vote harvesting and so on. Now, the people quite reasonably believed that the vote had been stolen from them, that Trump had won and won easily, which on balance of probability he had, but yet because of this rigging, fixing, and the dirty tricks of the globalist machine, that Biden was given the very illegitimate victory. So there was some protests around there. Now, when the protests sort of got going, it was really a bit of a non-event. But somehow there was a small nucleus of people who were obviously professional agitators, and also they were at the forefront of any sort of where it got, where a window got smashed or a door got kicked in or something, something like that. It was always these agitators. Now I noticed that the primary agitators, and particularly the ones that were caught on camera, and they were named, that they didn't get charged, so that the main ringleaders of this so-called insurrection, as it were, as it was named, they weren't charged by the FBI or the law enforcement authorities, and the media was spinning so many lies about it that you have to look at that and say, well, was this a choreographed thing? Either they knew that there would be a protest. Like you say, hey, we're rigging the election here, and we're blatantly rigging the election. There's going to be protests. I know. Let's let the protest go ahead. We'll insert agitators and provocateurs in the crowd. They'll stir things up, and they'll smash a window here or do this or that there. We'll do that, and then we'll be able to say that the whole crowd they're all Nazis. They're all Hitler. And then we'll get the media to get on board with it. Then we can really come down hard on these people. We can just rando arrest anybody who was in the general vicinity at the time, whether they did anything illegal or not, who cares? And we'll just engage in mass illegality in arbitrarily arresting people and throwing them to prison. And mass illegality was what it was, by the way. So let's now look at the protests in Britain. Now there was a stabbing of this is young, like, I don't know, 10-year-old girls or something at some sort of I think it was like a Taylor Swift dance show or dance class or something like that in Britain, and somebody from an immigrant family, recent immigrant, like African, I think it was, family, decided to go on a stabbing spree, and this, I mean, the temperature was already pretty high, but that, I think, just set it off, and then people started protesting. Now, these protests were just simply protests. Why are these people here? Why are you bringing in these migrants? They have a completely different culture, completely different attitude, completely different views. Even that their children that are born in England or come here at a very young age, even they still adhere to the values of their ancestors and run around with knives and machetes and so on. So we don't want these migrants here. We've told, the government, the people have told the government, we don't want this mass migration. We don't want these sort of things going on. Why are they still happening, and why are these stabbings just now a regular feature of British life when they never used to be? So these protests were quite legitimate. They're voters, they're citizens. Why can't they protest? Now, should they, get violent and start, torching things or beating people up or committing illegal acts? Then, well, of course not. That goes without saying. But when black and brown people commit these illegal acts, the police and the authorities are very, very gentle touch with it. There appears to be, there is an obvious and manifest reluctance to get tough with them. But it was very different here. There was a small nucleus of what appeared to be provocateurs in this crowd. Now, I looked at some of the footage, and the people that were doing, as far as I could tell at least, were doing the organising, the leading, and the so on. They appeared to be just too disciplined and too focused and too tightly on message than as if they were just some rando protester. This leads me to believe that they were inserted agitators and provocateurs. So the government saw the opportunity, if there's going to be those three young girls have been stabbed or killed. I think they all died. They've been killed. There's going to be protests here. We know that the people in the area are already irritated and annoyed by mass migration. There's going to be protests. Well, we're not going to pacify them because mass migration is the globalist central to the globalist program, and we will not deviate from the globalist program at all. Our job as members of the British government is to get down on our knees and serve our globalist masters. Do you think we're going to listen to those fucking voters, that fucking rabble, those damn far-right now? So the decision was made, I would argue, and I'm speculating, of course, here. I have no evidence for this, pure speculation. but the parallels are just too much to ignore between January 6th and the British riots. That the British government, at the egging on of their globalist masters, by the way, would have, there's going to be riots or protests or marches or whatever, we can capitalise on this. So we'll insert agitators into the crowd, and it'll burn a few police cars or something like that. Then we can say it's far-right Nazis and insurrection, this and that. And then we can come down harder and say, well, look, we're only doing it to the Nazis. If they're Nazis, we're allowed to do this. Nazis don't have legal rights. And that was really the thing. So if you look at the sort of charges that people were arrested for, other than a small handful, who I would suggest the main provocateurs were actually inserted government agents. I don't believe they're just rando people. Some might have been, but I think the ones that were really stirring the pot and getting it moving and getting the crowd into a heightened state of agitation, they would have been inserted government agents. And so the police response was, I've never seen from the British police, I've never seen a response like this. I mean, you'd have to go back to the paranoia about invasion during World War II. You have to go back that far to get this level of police response. The belief that a German invasion was imminent and that there were, Nazi agents running all over the place that were going to assist, aid and abet the invasion. And this, so there was an absolute across-the-board paranoia there for a while, or certainly while the possibility of an invasion was looming. That's the last time I think you saw a police response on this scale. Now, so you've got to ask, well, why? I mean, if the police are capable of this response, why didn't they do it for all the child grooming gangs? The Muslim child grooming gang. Why weren't they doing it for the Palestinian riots and protests and marches when they're calling for genocide of the Jews? Why don't they do it when there's black riots and why don't they do it in areas that are thick with knife crime and machete crime? Why aren't they doing it there? But for some reason, it was only against white people they're prepared to do this, and against white people who are complaining about the globalization program. The black and the brown people, they don't complain about globalization. They complain about other issues, and you're not giving us enough free stuff. Well, they'll complain about that, but they won't complain about or the central planks, if you like, of globalization. But white people will, because white people are the ones that are being the most disadvantaged and disenfranchised by it. So anyway, so these protests go ahead, and the police response, the government response is, you have to sort of, this beggars belief that the political head of the head of government just announces that they want the judiciary to do fast track, quick, smart, fast track prosecutions and imprisonments of people. But aren't the judiciary supposed to be independent? The separation of powers. And the last time the government wanted the judiciary to do this was in the days of Oliver Cromwell, when he arm twisted the judiciary into arranging the beheading of the king. Interestingly, King Charles at the time. Goodness me, the parallels there, the irony of that. Now, so the Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, says, I want judiciary to do this, and the judiciary just falls into line instantly. I mean, where's the separation of powers here? Where's the independent judiciary? The judiciary, I mean, now this is the clearest proof that I think any of us need the judiciary, well, in the United Kingdom at least, but and elsewhere, in the United States, the judiciary has been completely politicized, as indeed has the police force. They've been completely politicized. I want you to go and arrest this guy here, Billy Bob. What's the charge? Look, he was somewhere near that protest. Well, what are we going to charge him with then? I don't know, make something up, you fucking moron. Just do it. Just do what I tell you to do. Arrest the motherfucker, okay? I'm ordering you to do it. Just do it. So it's got to be those sort of conversations, and ones like them are happening. So people are being arrested. Now, in order to get them to plead guilty, they're using, as I would believe, the same tactic as they did in January 6th. They'll try and terrify. Some of these people are quite simple, by the way. They'll terrify them with threats. If you get 100 years in prison, you'll do this, and we're going to do that, blah, 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 and absolutely terrify the wits out of them. But if you sign this bit of paper here, just plead guilty, we'll talk to the judge, and we'll try and get you just a few months in prison. And yeah, it'd be better for you. It'd be better for everybody. I mean, how will your mother manage, your aged, infirm mother? How will she manage while you're in prison? If you're there in prison for years, what would happen to your aged mother there? I mean, she could die. She could fall on the floor at night, and there's no one to call, no one to go, because you're in prison, because you're a law-breaking Nazi far-right motherfucker. So why don't you just sign this thing, and then you know that your mum will be, those sorts of things. That they'll be using all powers and persuasions on these people to try and terrify them witless. And the lawyers, the legal aid lawyers, some of them are quite poor, these people, so they get assigned a legal aid lawyer. The legal aid lawyer is working for the government. They are a government agent, and these people need to understand that their job is not to look after their client at all. Their job is to get the client to plead guilty, and then the legal aid lawyer's done their thing. And the legal aid lawyer says, well, you would have got 100 years in prison, but now you're only getting 12 months. I mean, hey, you're way in front. So they could argue that they provide some useful service when that wouldn't have been the case. So I see the parallels here. I see this was used by the government as a device to just go after people and to send a message. You defy the globalist project, and we will put you in prison. And that's just how it is. Now you can defy, brown people can defy us and all sorts of things. Black people can defy us. Illegal immigrants can defy us. They can all defy us. But white people, you are not allowed to defy us, and we will crush you if you attempt to. You've been a task today, your Pushback Channel. Thank you for listening.